You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. Our trek through the original series of the Twilight Zone. We're now into season 2 and we're getting very, very close to the end. Rod Serling is looking down, smiling upon us. And I think it's time for us to use the mind over matter. We're going to be talking about one grumpy individual who actually I quite sympathised with. So, the mind and the matter. Julian, what were your thoughts on this episode?
You know, Scott, I love doing these podcasts because it's the one time that I can get away from the people with all their stupid comments and endless clattering. This is about a guy who is overwhelmed by people on the subway and the work, and he's not wrong, right? Because he's, washed up in like sardines in a can, and he is given a self-help book by this sort of doofus who spills coffee on him all the time, and the self-help book, talks about consciousness, and he decides to basically make everyone disappear, and he can control reality. Not sure how that works, but it's a sort of classic be careful what you wish for sort of story. It's fine. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's one of those. It's fine. I like the setup. It's a very silly setup. I like the fact he tests it. There's no sort of like, when you have these meditative or spiritual journey things, whether it be like you become like a yogi, like a full-on proper, like you can control your body and do all these things and possibly levitate. And it takes decades of meditation and real discipline at this sort of performance. He's like, I read a book and I just thought hard about it. So,
and you see him doing so, and he doesn't seem to be concentrating that much. It's just like all he has to do is focus and like say, people aren't there. Make her disappear. Make her disappear about his landlord asking for the rent.
Yeah,
it's that simple.
Yeah, if only it was that simple. I mean, it's a very silly premise. However, one of the things, his name is Mr. Beecham, isn't it? And I appreciate his frustration. I mean, there's that sort of, he works in an insurance company. It's loud. It's sort of like there's a lot of people. He gets bumped into, gets coffee spilled. Like you said, the tube train is busy. It's uncomfortable. The moment he gets home, he's then sort of like being harassed by his landlord, pay rent, and all this other stuff. So there's this sort of, like you said, this overwhelmed. He's just been overwhelmed by society at this point, and so he's sort of at breaking point. So rather than taking up arms and going postal, he decides to think people out of existence. But one of the things I sort of realize is how unimaginative Mr. Beecham is then at that point.
Yes, exactly. Isn't he? I mean, all he does is make people disappear, right?
Yeah.
First he makes his landlord disappear, and then he makes everybody else disappear. And you're right. It's like I had the same thought. Could you possibly experiment with other stuff before you recant?
Yeah, you've tapped into the ability to literally change reality, and even if you are going to do that, where you make everybody disappear, the first thing he does is goes to work. Now I want to know who was driving. I want to know who was driving the train for a start.
Yeah.
But he goes into the office, there's nobody there, and he completes his paperwork, and then it's just like, oh, I'm done now. And then he starts, and instantly his own personality sort of turns on him and is like, well, but you're bored now, aren't you? You like you said, you're sort of careful what you wish for. And all I'm thinking is like, but it's just like, go to the beach, go for a walk. Aren't there places you've been fascinated by for years you want to go and visit? Like it just.
Go to empty Coney Island and ride some rides,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that at first he doesn't know if it succeeded, right? Because he's only used it on the landlord, and he's sort of still surprised by how empty the subway is. which is where he concentrates, and then the quiet comes and everybody's gone. I'm not sure that he knows that everybody's gone, but so I sort of thought that he was going through the motions and he would figure out like, oh yeah, wait a minute, I don't have to go to work anymore, right? Like there's literally no one left.
Yeah.
But instead, he's just instantly lonely. He doesn't, do anything. And then he replaces everybody with copies of himself. And of course, is quickly miserable because they're all as grumpy and curmudgeon-y as him. This does get into a couple things that we've talked about, or a couple themes. One is that it seems to me that Serling is preoccupied with this idea of an empty world, right? And it keeps coming back in multiple episodes where somebody is just sort of all alone in a city or all alone. And we see that later on in Vanilla Sky and Open Your Eyes. And it is a sort of haunting idea, but it does seem that something of that is a preoccupation for Serling. And then the second thing is this idea that we've talked about of like, would you be your friend if you met a copy of yourself, right? Or if the world were entirely versions of Julian Darius, would I be happy? And if not, what's wrong with me? I think that's a bad sign if the answer is no.
Well, it's a really sort of one of the things I find with this episode, because those are the 2 points. I mean, you're right. It's that thing of the empty world. You've got, we mentioned for the last one as well, but like that, the pilot episode is literally that. Like the pilot episode is that, it's him running through this empty small town, and it's come up again, even to the extent of in the first episode, in the first season, the one with Burgess Meredith, when he just wants to read his books. It takes the devastation of humanity for him to be able to read his books. Things like that. There is this notion of just being left alone, for good or bad. And again, like, I think that this kind of like, I Am Legend, written in 19, Richard Matheson, obviously writes for Twilight Zone, and obviously wrote, I Am Legend, which is very much about like, the last survivor. And although it's about vampires, there's still that isolation and stuff that still goes through all that. It's definitely this weird trope, and I wonder where I'm curious as to where it came from, and is it because of one of the things post World War II was this thing of a population boom. There was a massive population growth. We'd lost people, and sort of there was now the baby boom. There was this idea of growth and population growth and stuff, and so I wonder about this. Is it about the fear of population growth? I don't know. But one of the things
I don't know either. It could just be existential, right? I mean, it could just be this sort of, obsession that
Serling sort of has, isn't it? So yeah, I don't know. It's just weird things, but I and again, there's obviously a budget constraint, because I can imagine there's a version of this very much like you mentioned, sort of like Vanilla Sky, and there's other films that have done it. I think not even Resident Evil did it at one point, and 28 Days Later did a version of this sort of thing. The empty streets in a very busy place, even. Not Hot Fuzz, like it's a zombie trip, isn't it? Shaun of the Dead, that sort of like, the populated streets before, and sort of like things being done in a similar way. But one of the things I was interested in this episode is this doofus. You say about this being able to be your own friend, and what that means. But there's also like how you treat people, and this idea that this kid that sort of bumps coffee to him, but clearly likes him because he saves him a space at lunch. He's been and got this book for him as a bit of an apology. So he clearly, not much cares for him, but wants to sort of form this friendship. And one of the things I was curious that this thing didn't seem to follow and didn't sort of argue was in that loneliness was. I thought they'd expand that need for someone who, just one person who listens to him, or one person, that. But the problem with this episode is it's not binary. It doesn't have to be binary. He's the one changing reality. If this was being done to him, if this was a Wish, like a Genie episode, like a Wish episode where it was binary, people are either here or they're not, which is the decision he sort of comes to at the end, then. I'd be like, okay, I can sort of get the dichotomy of this. But because he's the one controlling reality, it's just like, you know, when he starts talking to himself about it, I'm like, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Like, you literally could just bring back 100 people. Like, you can do whatever you want. Like, you've clearly highlighted you can do this. You literally populated the world with versions of yourself. Like, I don't understand why this is so difficult for this person.
Yeah, you're Thanos. You've got the Infinity Gems. You can make half the world disappear, you know,
Yeah.
and you can tweak it. And you could also make the coffee guy appear and then change his personality and be like, you know, yeah, you're kind of annoying me right now. Let's bring up the sweet, you know, the shyness by 50%, sort of Westworld style. Yeah, I agree. There's a singular lack of imagination here, and some of that is the runtime, right? You know, like
Yes,
and the budget.
Yeah, it definitely shows in this where this is lacking any form of nuance to have that conversation or discussion around the idea of loneliness or isolation. I mean, you know, like you say, he's only weirdly. I mean, one of the things that I thought was again not explored. He works in insurance, and the first thing he wants to do is complete his in tray. So he goes and finishes all the work on his in tray. And what I was hoping they don't even give a nod to it, because then he's like, oh, there's nothing left to do, you know. Because then he does control reality, because then he has like a rainstorm start and all this other stuff. And I was like, stupid. You know, it is. But like, I was hoping he'd be like, oh, well, I want him to be acknowledged that I'm just a cog in the machine. Like, I fill out these forms, but these forms are generated somewhere else. Someone else populates them, and I get them, and then I complete them, and then they go on to somebody else. Like, without that process, without that cog being, I'm just a cog. Without the machine, I have no purpose. That's what I was hoping this would go. When he finishes his work, was to be like, oh, there's nothing left for me to do. I don't have a purpose. My work is my purpose. That's why I did this. And I was hoping it goes to explore that, to have some of this nuance about exploring why, you know, you do what you do. You know, like, and it just lacks all that as a bit of as a you know, as to why he changes things back.
Right. I mean, for me, that's part and parcel of what was for me the greatest problem, which is that although he changes things back, that would suggest, and we've seen this in other Twilight Zone episodes, a sort of, well, I've learned something, right? You know, it's a sort of, you know, what is it? The Christmas movie where, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, right? Like,
yes. Okay,
it's not as bad as I think, right? Except there's no lesson learned here. Like, you're suggesting a possible lesson. I mean, of like, wait a minute, I'm a cog in a machine and I need other people. He doesn't realize that he needs other people. He doesn't realize he needs to be a nicer person. Like, if I saw copies of myself and was like, oh my God, I'm a monster, you know, like, I can't stand myself, I'd be like, look, I absolutely have to change tonight. You know, like, I see crystal clear how I need to change. Well, I hate this about myself. He doesn't do anything. And the only suggestion that he's changed at all is that he's nice to the guy who spills coffee on him, you know, one time. But it's not clear that he's going to keep being nice. I mean, he hasn't fundamentally changed.
Yeah, it has illusions of like a Christmas Carol, hasn't it? That sort of thing of, you know, yeah, or at least it should do. It should have that similar formatting where, like, you go through scenarios and realize that you need to be a better person. Like, you know, again, like, you see what you've lost, you see that, you know, there are better people in the world, and then you see that the future is bleak. That should, you know, the past, present, future. And if you want to do that, then okay, you know, or look at what you've lost, get rid of everybody, and then he realizes what he's lost. He brings back the doofus, whatever he is. You know, he brings him into existence. Say, oh, I want someone to talk to. He does say, oh, the world's empty. You know, oh, you did it with it, because he obviously knows where it's for. You did it. I'm going to go and do these amazing things. I'm taking the opportunity to go to Coney Island and do all this stuff, or I'm going to, like, this is the opportunity to have fun. And he's like, oh God, you know, see that there's a better way. And then I don't know. There's some way of presenting the future of saying like, well, you could do all this stuff. You should be a part of this, But I don't think this episode doesn't want to tell you a thing. Like, Christmas Carol is all about being a better person and not being a Scrooge. This episode doesn't have a point in that way.
Yeah, it's just kind of an exploration of this idea. And it also doesn't have as much resolution as, remember the episode where the guy flips the quarter on its side and gets powers?
Yes.
There, the quarter falls over and he loses the powers. Here, he still has these powers at the end of the episode. and he also, while being nice to the doofus guy, he's also kind of mean in that he says, "Oh, I got nothing from that book. It was silly." Which
he calls it pap, which I thought was a great. It was a great word. Yeah, I thought it was a bit of pap. Yeah,
which is sort of amusing, but it's also like, you have superpowers now. You're still kind of being mean to this guy and saying, your book was full of shit. Thanks for that dumb book you gave me. I mean, there's no resolution. He doesn't learn anything. He's still got superpowers, but he's never going to use them again. I mean, it doesn't really know what it's doing, except, again, a sort of another exploration of what it's like to be alone in a world, and wouldn't you rather have people, warts and all.
Yeah, this is where, and this is, I see this in some sci-fi. You get authors, and there are authors. I often think of this with both Isaac Asimov and sort of Philip K. Dick. They are more about the philosophy and the idea than the sort of the human element of it, and which is fine. And sometimes if it's big enough and weird enough and it works well enough, you can get away with it. But with an episode like this, with Serling and that whoever's writing this episode, like they have this idea they want to explore, but it clearly needs a human element because the idea is centered around a person. It needs this element to sort of, for it to work, to hinge on. Otherwise, it just feels meaningless. And unfortunately, this episode does feel a little bit meaningless. I mean, this is an episode where it would end with Rod Serling saying, like, and we leave Mr. Beecham still a bit of a prick. And that's it. You're like, all right, okay, fine. He hasn't learned anything. Sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. Any final thoughts then or any other further thoughts for the mind and the matter?
Yeah, I just would say it's a fine episode. It's nothing special, but there's nothing offensive about it. I mean, it has these faults, but it's okay. And it was written in a week basically. So I mean, it's exploring something and it's fine, but it's certainly not a standout. I do want to say that this idea of what you would do with these superpowers sticks in Serling's mind, and that will come back in a famous episode.
Okay. Oh, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, with the child.
The little boy. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so that's what I'm looking forward to getting to.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm seeing that already. When we get to the season wrap-up, I'm seeing that already. That there are ideas that have come up before that you go, oh, that one, he hadn't explored that enough, or he hadn't answered it himself enough with that episode, and he's coming bringing it back. Definitely. Thing I'll say about this, you say it's fine. There were some bits that made me chuckle when he brings the world back, and it's all versions of him. It's actually done very, very well. There's like a female version of him that's really rude to him in the lift. I thought it was very funny. They used incredibly creepy masks for some of the background characters to sort of be versions of him, but it still works. It looked kind of good. And when it pans across and there's 3 versions of him sat at sort of like consecutive desks, all moaning and moping. There are moments that are very well done. They're very funny and they're actually quite well done. And so it's entertaining in itself. Like, I like the idea of this. And I like the idea, and I think some moments are very good, but it doesn't deliver the punch that I wanted it to deliver. I think that's the problem. Okay. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, there we have it. Another trek through the Twilight Zone. And we're going to say to you, just remember, like, it is mind over matter. But please, if you are out there, don't blink us out of existence. We have much to offer, and whatever's going on, at least keep us around, because then we can carry on doing these podcasts for you. So.
But if you want to concentrate on us having more patrons and the two of us making more money, please be free to do so.
That's right. Yeah. My bank account. If you want to imagine that full of those pound signs going up. More than happy with that. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.